Good evening, everyone. This is Dr. Sue Onslow. I'm currently Director of the Institute of Commonwealth Studies at the School of Advanced Study in the University of London. And it's my great pleasure to begin today's discussion, The Future of the Commonwealth, and to welcome Lord Desai, an eminent economist and member of the House of Lords, who can offer his informed and incisive views on the future of this multilateral association. The Vice Chancellor, Professor Wendy Thomson, will be joining us. Unfortunately, she's been having some connection issues, but as I say, she will come into the seminar when she's able and resolve the IT hiccup at her end. So I'd like to invite Lord Desai to reflect on the future of the Commonwealth, coming as it does after the excellent Jubilee celebrations and before the beginning of the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, which will begin in Kigali next Monday, and of course Prince Charles, representing the Queen as the ceremonial head of the Commonwealth, will be there. This event also comes after the major event which we organised here at Senate House in conjunction with the Round Table, the Commonwealth Association and the Commonwealth Foundation, entitled Is the Commonwealth Working? And I've put a link to these podcasts into the chat function, as I think that members of the audience may be very interested in looking at this high quality debate, which made substantive recommendations for the revitalization and reform of the Commonwealth. Professor Thomson is just joining the call. So while she is going to be leading the questioning, but if I could invite Lord Desai to begin, please. Sir, what is the future of the Commonwealth in your view?
Well, let me put it this way, that I was born during the old Commonwealth in 1940, when India was not yet independent, and we still were under the King Emperor, George VI, and there was also a local prince in Baroda, where I was born. And then much of the new Commonwealth has happened during my lifetime. And so it has been an ongoing show, which I've been able to watch and look at. And I think that we have to first of all say that the Commonwealth is the only institution that I know of in the world which is spread to all the continents. It is there in the Americas, it's there in Asia, it's there in Africa, it's there in Europe, and of course, Australia and New Zealand. So every continent has a member of the Commonwealth there. And it is really a very diverse institution because there are people of African origin living in America. There are people of Indian origin living in UK. I'm like, look at the present British cabinet. It's full of immigrants. And then there are all sorts of flows in and out from one part of the Commonwealth to another. So the Commonwealth is a very, very good global institution. It has its own peculiarity, but it is built around principles other than what the United Nations is built around. And by and large, I think one has to appreciate that it has lasted a long time. And what I want to do this evening is to really focus on the new Commonwealth as it happened in the 1950s, when India became a republic. And then what are the challenges facing? What are the challenges that Prince Charles will face in Kigali? And indeed, what are the challenges that the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge faced when they were out there, or Prince Edward and Sophie, they faced when they went into the Caribbean? And I think these are things we have to take very seriously, because whether the Queen is the Empress of the Commonwealth or just the head of the Commonwealth is a very important issue. And I think, let me just put this way, when India became independent and became a republic, it stopped being a colony, but it stayed in the Commonwealth. And that is what changed the whole nature of the Commonwealth, because the Commonwealth no longer just another name for the empire. It became a genuinely multinational institution due to the old associations, but there was new membership of people who did not have to acknowledge the monarch of United Kingdom as their head of the state. And I think that is where things are getting interesting.
So could I ask you, please, as my first question before I pass the questioning to Professor Thomson, were you aware of this shift to being a progressive new organization at the time, or did this only dawn on you belatedly?
No. I was rather a precocious boy. So this was happening when I was about 10 or 11. There was a lot of discussion in the Indian press as to how India had proposed this particular constitutional arrangement, new constitutional arrangement, because Britain was very keen to keep India in the family, but rules had to be changed because India was independent. Unlike Australia, New Zealand, Canada, India was independent and wanted to become a republic, which meant that the head of the UK was no longer the head of India. But there still was an association of long standing, which had to be, India wanted to preserve it, UK wanted to preserve it, and that's what made the Commonwealth a different association than it was before India became independent. So India's independence was a very crucial event for the Commonwealth, and that redefined the Commonwealth. And of course, India said that the monarch will remain the head of the Commonwealth, and that has been accepted. And one of the consequences of that is that Prince Charles is going to Kigali as the head of the Commonwealth in place of Her Majesty. But I think this is one of the issues which are going to burble up, because the Queen is identified personally with the new Commonwealth, because much of it has happened after her father died. India became a republic in 1950. She came to the throne in 1952. And so in much of the last 70 years, she has headed the new Commonwealth. And that, I think, which is unique to her, that she has shaped the Commonwealth the way it is. But now there are a lot of pressures of people talking about accounting for old slavery or questioning the role of the Queen. There are rumors that Australia is going to start something to make a republic or not. And so I think we have to find out that if Australia becomes a republic, the Commonwealth doesn't have to change. Commonwealth has already absorbed that difference. If Canada wants to become a republic, that's fine. We have absorbed that change. So there are no restrictions on the members of the Commonwealth choosing how they want to shape their constitution. UK is no longer telling them what to do, what not to do. At least all the UK wants is, we want them to be in the family, and we don't want them to leave the family.
Professor Thomson.
Sorry?
Excuse me, Professor Thomson, I think your microphone is off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Muted by the organizer. So my apologies. I've had a little bit of a connectivity problem, but I have heard the contribution from Lord Desai, and it's really been a good way of starting off the conversation. I mean, it's a moment in time, really, isn't it? As we're on the eve, really, of the next heads of government meeting, to really be reflecting on these questions of leadership and role, I guess, of the new Commonwealth. Well, I'm hoping that we can continue the conversation that you've begun, really, and I'll call upon Sue as well to give some thoughts, because I know she's quite an expert in this area of the Commonwealth as well. So maybe just picking up really for your views, Lord Desai, on your recollection and reflections really on the changes that were made in the new Commonwealth when India became a republic, and still seeing it now as relevant. So what in your work as an economist, internationally, how important did you see the Commonwealth and as a framework for, or an organization of developing states? Was it was it a laboratory for ideas around development or debt management? Was it a network of policies or approaches, by other economists?
But when I was about 11, we had just moved from Baroda to Bombay, and the cricket team, international cricket team, which came to India, was called the Commonwealth 11, and it was genuinely picking up cricketers from across the Commonwealth, Australia, New Zealand, England, and so on. So the idea was, okay, this is how the Commonwealth is. West Indies is part of it, India is part of it, UK is part of it. And so that, in a sense, made my understanding of the Commonwealth sharper, because it was not the MCC, it was not Australia, it was a Commonwealth, i.e. a combination of all the other cricket playing countries who could come to India as a team. So I think Commonwealth is always a collection of British colonies, British dependencies, whatever you call them. But cricket is part of it. There are lots of other constitutional elements which are part of it. The English language is part of it. Shakespeare is part of it. So in a sense, we have to celebrate the Commonwealth as a very unique institution. And the question always is, with unique institutions, how do we keep it unique? How do we go forward? Because there's a whole new generation coming who see the history in different ways. So we have to understand that, yes, there will be changes, but with the change, there will be continuity. And what kind of continuity there will be as the Commonwealth changes. And I think one of the very interesting things that I would like to develop is basically when Her Majesty the Queen said at the last Chogam in 2016 that Charles would be the next head of the Commonwealth. Did she jump the gun? Is it necessary that the British monarch always has to be the head, or any head of state of any Commonwealth country can be the head of the Commonwealth? That's an open question, because I'm sure countries like India or even New Zealand or Australia may feel that they need a turn as well now after all these years, and see whether they can temporarily be the head of the Commonwealth. And then it might be a rotating headship of the Commonwealth. And the Commonwealth Secretariat should be rotating, not just be in London, it should be in one or two other places, because they have been member of the Commonwealth for a long time. And so we need to reward countries who have stayed in the Commonwealth. And I think a more of an equal status treatment of the Commonwealth countries who have been there for a long time, I think is required. So I think some of the thinking has to be done by the people who care about the Commonwealth, and not just try, as I think some people in this country are trying, to preserve that kind of old thing about, oh, but the Queen is the Empress of the Caribbean countries. No, if they want to become a republic, that's fine, but they'll still be the Commonwealth. So that, I think, is a distinction we have to develop, that being a republic does not mean you're not part of the Commonwealth. You may choose not to be, but you can be accommodated in the Commonwealth with a variety of political arrangements, because this is about the past continuing to benefit all of us as we go into the future. And it's a very unique thing. The UN has a very short history compared to the Commonwealth. Commonwealth has, decades of history. So I think we have to understand the strength of the Commonwealth and its emotional appeal. And I'm quite easily in favor of the Commonwealth continuing and developing. Just as it developed just before Her Majesty took over, under the last years of her father, the Commonwealth did change. When India became a republic, it can change again. Commonwealth had a Harare Declaration, and Commonwealth was able to suspend countries, which the UN doesn't do. So I think we have to see the Commonwealth in a very different kind of global organization, which is a friendly global organization of people who've known each other for many, many years, many centuries.
Yeah,
and that is a unique thing about it.
Yeah, and I can see the distinction you're making, which is an important one, between being a member of the Commonwealth and the form of constitutional arrangement which they may have within their own nation, and the Republic being capable of being a member. I think that is an important distinction which has been made. The question of leadership, though, you've raised, and this is something I think Sue Professor Onslow has put in the chat as something that was discussed recently amongst people who attended the recent conference on the future of the global monarchy and Commonwealth realms. I guess that is a topical question at the moment, given the moment that we're facing now. What should be some of the considerations, I guess, in how that leadership question has been broached? I mean, as you say, it was broached at the 2018 Shogam. Is it time to revisit that? What was the consideration then? And I guess the question of, if you mentioned that having the authority to exclude members, which is one of, I guess the defining characteristics of a club, which, on what basis would they do so, I guess, and what does it actually represent? For those of you who were party to some of those discussions around the leadership, I don't know, Sue, whether you want to say something about some of the, debates that were had in those concerned about the sort of the human rights and, parliamentary sort of rules of the different Commonwealth stations, whether the monarchy leadership was seen as an important one or one that perhaps needs to be regularly revisited. What was the tone of that debate and one that we might want to consider now?
The discussion on leadership that was held as part of the 4 sessions on Is the Commonwealth Working addressed this very point, Wendy, as you say. Yeah. And there seemed to be 3 aspects to it. Lord Desai, you've talked about the Queen's role and the way in which over the past 20 years she has been identified with the new Commonwealth as a new organisation. But there are debates which say that this is tying a modern institution in the 21st century to a 1,000-year-old hierarchical institution, and that this perpetuates the image of the Commonwealth as still having its roots very much in empire and being still a post-imperial organization rather than a modern progressive one. So do you feel that this actually is problematic for the Commonwealth, or do you feel that having the Queen and then the future King as ceremonial head of the Commonwealth adds to the visibility, the hospitality, the awareness of the Commonwealth, giving it a distinct identity as a sub-global system? But there are other aspects of leadership which I think are also swept up in this, which is when you say, should it be a rotating headship? If the Queen were or the British monarch no longer head, would that not risk the headship becoming involved in domestic politics? How would it rotate? Who would pay for it? There are those aspects. And when you say a rotating Commonwealth Secretariat, well, the non-aligned movement has a rotating secretariat. And there are then institutional problems of that and extra cost.
Oh, absolutely.
So in question of leadership, that it needs financial resources, it needs visibility and credibility. So leadership is problematic in this case, I think.
I think the difficulty is that the Queen's headship of the Commonwealth is not necessarily a constitutional thing, but it's also a very personal thing. And as and when we have a change of the person of the monarch, which will happen, I don't know how soon, but it will happen sometime. Will there be a change in the nature of the Commonwealth? You see, because she embodies the Commonwealth in a variety of ways. During her reign, a lot of Commonwealth countries have become independent, but stayed in the Commonwealth. She has been able to develop a multiracial, diverse society in UK. And the UK is a much more diverse society than it used to be. And there is not a hint that at any stage she has obstructed, she has actually encouraged it. Now, the thing then is, if it is always the monarch of UK who is the head of the Commonwealth, or is it the Commonwealth is a family and the headship can go in turns? Now that the original head is no longer there, as and when it'll happen. I mean, she may live another 10 years for all I know. Her mother lived beyond 100, so who knows? So I think, but as and when it happens, we have to think about these things. Because, you know, if Australia decides to become a republic, it will still stay in the Commonwealth. You know, anybody can become, Commonwealth can be a collection of republics. It doesn't matter. So the question of the head of the Commonwealth ought to be separated, in my mind, from whether the members are republics or they are, as it were, have a dominion status. So Canada and Australia and New Zealand have a dominion status. The Governor General is still theoretically appointed by the Queen, and they're not republics. They're not independent, which is not the case with India or Pakistan or Sri Lanka or Malaysia, which are all republics, and they have stayed in the Commonwealth. So this is an interesting anomaly. And if Australia wants to become a republic, if some Caribbean islands want to become a republic, well, fine. It does not or should not disturb the nature of the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is a versatile organization. It has become, under Her Majesty's sort of tenure as a ruler, as a 70 years, the Commonwealth has developed. Now, how do we take it forward in a stronger way? And whereas in UK itself, there is a very fond thing of being the empress and all that, especially in regard to the Caribbean islands. That's not the issue anymore. We want them to stay in the Commonwealth, whether they are a dominion status first, a colony, or a republic, because Commonwealth transcends the old relationship of emperor and subjects. And that, I think, is very, very important for us to understand. You know, it is Queen Victoria who, when the Crown took over India, had this declaration in which she said, "I shall treat all my subjects alike, regardless of religion or race," or things like that. And that was an amazing human rights document that Queen Victoria issued in 1858. And that was read out in every town and village of India as a public pronouncement, because people couldn't read in those days. So the Declaration of Queen Victoria was a human rights document for all her subjects. And she said, "You're all equal." Now the Commonwealth has that kind of properties which we ought to keep and develop, and not get this peculiar sort of hurt feeling. Oh, you know, when the Cambridges went to Jamaica, where it was when, you know, there was an opposition to the empire. Yeah, and obviously that's history, but we have to look forward to this. And no, we have managed these problems, and we can manage them again.
I guess I think that's, you know, that's a well-made point about, you know, the history and the shared values that, you know, have really brought the Commonwealth membership together and are enduring. I guess, you know, if you think that if you don't have the monarchy, it kind of fills that leadership question. And you're making, I think, the point well that, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to continue as it has done as the head. But I guess if you think of some of the points Sue was making, if you think of what the alternative would be, you know, there's all sorts of questions that, how would they be selected? You know, how would they be funded?
Of course, sure.
And how would, I mean, there is a Secretary General who is, I guess, the currently political head of the Commonwealth, and, you know, that's a regularly contested position, I guess we're about to see shortly.
Yeah.
So, you know, how is that, you know, there's, you know, if the monarchy didn't exist, you know, would you have to invent it really? You know, is it, it does fill that spot. And I guess the question would be interesting to hear, you know, your thoughts on, if you didn't continue with that sort of stability of that the monarchy represents, how would you address some of these other questions? Because as you've said, in the UN, some of these questions of the politics of international organizations become quite challenging.
I know again and again, because you've just been through the Jubilee celebrations.
Yeah.
The personal cannot be separated from the constitutional, because the Queen has more or less coincided with the new Commonwealth.
Yes.
1 year apart, she has been the embodiment of the new Commonwealth. And that Commonwealth in which she is the head of the Commonwealth, she is not the head of the state of the Commonwealth. And that distinction can be maintained. Whoever is the head of the Commonwealth is not the head of the state of members of Commonwealth. And I agree with you that it will cause less controversy if we continue with the tradition that the British monarch is the head of the Commonwealth. That saves us a lot, because we have the next 3 generations ready to go. We saw on the balcony of the Buckingham Palace. So that's fine. But I think these issues are going to arise, especially as members become republics. And I think we have to remove the misunderstanding that becoming a republic, no longer acknowledging the monarch as the head of your state, does not mean you need to leave the Commonwealth.
No,
Commonwealth is a association, friendly association of countries which have a connection with Britain over the past, over the long past. And obviously some people want to question the past, but be that as it may, we can all question the past, but we can still keep on being a family of the Commonwealth nations. And I think that is where leadership, and it could be Prince Charles when he comes to the throne, but that distinction has to be maintained, and always possible that somebody other than the monarch could become head, but it is unlikely that they will become head.
Well, maybe we could, sort of sticking with this question of, the importance of the new Commonwealth and its future, something I'd be interested in both of your thoughts on. Certainly, as the university's considered how it wants to position its Institute of Commonwealth Studies, one of the debates that obviously this question exists in is, of post-Brexit UK foreign policy, and what way we wish to, fulfill our role within multilateral organizations. And I guess there have been suggestions by some that the Commonwealth offers perhaps an attractive alternative to the EU, and a broader one, and one that has a history, and that could in fact increase its importance with our changing connection to Europe. I wondered what you thought of that. Do you think that's a new avenue to consider for the Commonwealth in relationship to the UK in any case?
Well, one of the things is we could do perhaps is look at other similar organizations of other maritime empires, what France has done. France is the only comparable other imperial country which wants to maintain connections. For example, the French colonial people could sit in French Parliament and things like that. But France tried to maintain, but the French Commonwealth, if I will call it that, is not as lively, as far as I know, as the British Commonwealth. And so we have to ask, what is it in the history of these empires and history of the monarchy or history of the republic, in case of France, which encourages or discourages this kind of international global associations, which the Commonwealth is the global association of countries with a common past. And why is it not been emulated in other places? Because there are not that many copies of the Commonwealth around the world. And there's a Commonwealth. And while there's always a controversy or a worry in these isles, as it were, people are still there, voluntarily willing. And of course, Rwanda has joined the Commonwealth and is now becoming a player. And so it's an interesting thing of somebody joining the Commonwealth without having a past association with Britain. Now, do other countries want to join? We don't know. But is it possible that other countries may say, well, we like what you do, we like the way you conduct human rights discussions, and we would like to join, although we were not part of the British Empire.
Yes.
Is that possible?
Yes, well, it's a good question to say, but I guess it would presume that if you're going to have a club that's in kind of recruitment mode, if you like, or enticement of or encouragement to expand its membership, you'd really need to define, I think, quite clearly, wouldn't you, what the role and value of the Commonwealth was? And I think you've articulated that well, and I think I know that Sue could do similarly. The question is, how widely understood is that known, beyond some of the people who are so close to it, well understood?
As an economist, I read Adam Smith off and on, long time. And this is 1776, Wealth of Nations. And Adam Smith says that maybe the Americans should be given seats in the parliament. And maybe that will make them happier and they will not be fighting us. This is 1776, before they go independent. And he suggests something we the French did later on. But he said, make them members of the Commonwealth. Like the Irish were members of parliament, after all. They've gone in since 1921, but the Irish were members of the House of Commons and some in the House of Lords. So in a sense, there are all kinds of experiments have been done, and we need to explore those experiments and how relevant they are for us today, because there have been innovations and we have gone beyond them, and now we need new innovations. But let's look at what we have done and see the value of that. Yes.
Well, I can see the argument for doing new and different things, to make the embodiment of the new Commonwealth, a reality. This question of, what it represents, obviously its history and its shared, cultures in many respects. But I guess the question of, of its values is core to it. And I wonder, how difficult it might be for the monarchy when it's playing that role of leadership to really represent and advocate for values of human rights and the rule of law, when obviously some members of the Commonwealth, don't always embody some of those values as strongly as probably some of us would like.
Well, I think the new generation is asking more questions. Much more, there's old thinking about slavery and all that being asked in the Caribbean and so on. And I think they have a perfect right to ask new questions. These questions can be answered, but we have to have a robust discussion, again, about the nature of the Commonwealth. And continuing with the headship of the Commonwealth being held by the monarch, actually gives a sharper edge to the discussion, because we have to say, okay, it was under UK leadership that these things happened. And therefore, is this association of former British colonies still a good thing to do? Should we be? My view is that yes, there is a lot to be gained from that association, because in a sense, it is the UN, for all sorts of reasons, is run by the 5 permanent members. They have very special status, unequal status. In Commonwealth, that is not the case. All nations are equal. The British monarch may be the head of the Commonwealth, but there is no veto that anybody has. And that, I think, makes the Commonwealth a very interesting association of independent countries with a common past. And I think that is a combination. The past is common, but the future may or may not be common. But we want to stay together and walk on the same road together, at different pace, but we want to walk on the same road together. And I think the issue of who the next Secretary General is going to be also as important as what about the head of the Commonwealth. But I think in the case of Secretary General, the post has been distributed across the Commonwealth in a very, very kind of good way. We've always found, and I think it should be spread around to other countries, so on, and that'll be good. But I'm looking forward to how the Commonwealth treats the countries which now become a republic, who want to become a republic, and even if they want to question the past, well, let's have a debate about that.
Well,
I think the Commonwealth should have open debates about everything, and it should not run away from any of this.
No, I see. Well, I think that's what say. A very well made point. I mean, it is a topical moment around the leadership of the Secretary General, obviously on the
Yeah.
eve of Shogam.
Yeah.
I think you, if I recall, were involved in some previous election of previous Secretary Generals when you were, I think, publicly in support of the Bangladeshi Foreign Minister some ways back. What do you think of that now? Are those still the issues that made you lend your support to that leadership candidate then? Are any of those things still relevant now? And what do you think the current debate? Is it mainly about personality and the geopolitics, or are there other issues at play?
Well, I myself found rather unusual that India had 2 successive appointments as Secretary General by the same person. I think one should have a rule that a country gets Secretary General once, it doesn't have the same thing again and again. And the Secretary Generalship ought to be widely distributed across the Commonwealth because there are lots of very able people in the Commonwealth. We have a common legal tradition. We all share the same legal tradition across the Commonwealth, and we understand our norms and our rules. So I think it would be good to for the members' idea that they belong to the Commonwealth belongs to them. If more Secretary Generals is found out from countries which we did not have that privilege in the past, and I think it's very important that we do not repeat the same old countries getting Secretary Generalship, however good they may be. We have to go on changing that because that is, if we want to keep the headship in one country, we have to change the Secretary Generalship. And maybe even the Secretariat may have to, but that is an open question because that may be too expensive to move the Secretariat all around. But yeah. I think we have to have a sense of participation in decision making that different countries should acquire that sense that they have contributed for 5 years, whatever it is, to the building of the Commonwealth as an institution through their Secretary Generalship. And I think, Patricia Scotland, whom I know very well and who was Attorney General in the Labour government, she represented a small West Indian country, Gambia, and is it Gambia? Anyway, whatever it is. But it is very good because she's a very able person. She knows British law. She was in the Parliament, in the House of Lords. She was in the cabinet. And she could perform a good role because she knows the British politics and she knows other politics. So that I think is very important.
Yes. I don't know, Sue, if you wanted to comment anything on the Baroness Scotland, but I'll give you an opportunity to do that. But I'm also aware that as we approach the hour, there's some questions that people have posed in the Q&A that perhaps we could make sure we get to. Did you want to say anything about, I think Baroness Scotland, did you want to say anything about that contest, Sue? I saw your mouth moving, but no noise coming out. So I'm just giving you that opportunity.
No, I'm on mute because I've been typing questions and I didn't want the tap to go against the audio. Okay. Lord Desai, I'd be very interested to know what you think of the suggestion that was made 2 weeks ago that the Secretary Generalship should be decided in between Commonwealth Heads of Government meetings so that any contest is not bound up with more substantive issues, because it is going to be one of the controversies of next week's Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. And let's face it, heads only have a very limited amount of time. So I take your point that Secretary Generals should only serve for one term and they should rotate. But what do you think of the argument about electing them in between heads of government meeting? Lord Desai, your audio has
Secretary
disappeared.
Generalship, which is not controversial. I think it's unfortunate Patricia Scotland case has been made controversial by the British press. But I know her as a very able person, so I don't know the truth of that. But I think whoever gets to be Secretary General has to have the confidence of the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth, all Commonwealth has to take part in the choice of the Secretary General. That has to be done democratically. Very important, I think. And I think there ought to be a convention that the big countries don't always get the job. It should really go to smaller countries. But that is difficult to fix. In the UN, they have fixed it. UN, they have fixed that the big countries are not allowed to, or they don't compete. The permanent members do not compete for Secretary Generalship by and large. They have not just succeeded in appointing a woman Secretary General, but that's another issue. But it is a sort of open contest. Candidates are declared and voted upon. And I think we ought to have something like that, more open process of the selection of the Secretary General.
Okay, all right.
And, if we could, I want to move the headquarters around as well, but that may be too expensive. I don't know.
Well, you've got a pretty splendid home base at the moment in Marble House, so I guess that would be a big challenge, wouldn't it? I just want to turn to some of these questions now, if you don't mind, to make sure that those who pose them have a chance to air them. We have a question from someone about who's anonymous, about whether any changes or impact on the educational institutions would occur as a result of I guess a change of leadership to the Commonwealth. And I think, Sue, you were going to have a stab at answering that question, I think, if someone suggested.
Sorry,
well,
I apologize.
I don't know, because the Commonwealth doesn't actually operate policies for other countries in any kind of. Was the question whether educational institutions should be?
Well, just reading it, it says, would be any changes or impact on the educational institution? And I'm guessing the question is related to whether the monarch as head of the Commonwealth, whether if that were to change, would that make any difference? And if so, what would it be? But I think, as you say, there isn't any national. There's been quite a lot.
I think institutions have to be robust, frank, and willing to discuss any ideas that are related to the subject they are studying. Another important thing is that we should never have the feeling somehow that you need in any kind of special places to study the Commonwealth. It should be studied anywhere. It happens that London has a Commonwealth Institute, and it has had for a long time. I was on the board for a while. So I think let us celebrate this institution, and let's get cooperation from around the Commonwealth, where they can send people to the Commonwealth Institute, and then sort of enrich our family of people, all academics studying the Commonwealth. I think there should be no reason why countries may not say they will finance a fellowship of their own citizens to come and become member of the Commonwealth institution, staff or research staff or whatever it is. Let's encourage people to say, we want one or two posts, we will finance, and that will be very good for us, because we want a good assembly of people from across the Commonwealth studying the Commonwealth, preferably financed by the whole Commonwealth, and that would be a great achievement if we could spread that message, because it is everybody's property. The Commonwealth is everybody's property, and it happens to be in London, just as the head of the Commonwealth happens to be in UK, but that doesn't mean anybody is excluded. So I think we have to say, come to London and study the Commonwealth.
Yeah, and I think
help us study the Commonwealth.
Yeah, and I think the sort of multilateral discussions around how that education and study happens, are also, very much on the agenda as we go forward. I'm going to press on. There's a question from Asayed Badrul Hassan asking, should the Commonwealth not be more cohesive as a body in the manner of the EU and ASEAN? could one think of a future president of the Commonwealth? So it would be kind of a more fundamental reinventing itself. I guess that's the question. Is that what's needed? What do you think?
I think, the next few years, we are all going to be asking fundamental questions about the monarchy and about the Commonwealth.
Yeah.
Those two things go together. And I don't think we can escape any. I think our duty is to open it out so the whole Commonwealth can take part in the debate. It's not just a British debate, it's a Commonwealth debate. And I think people should come and give us their ideas and let us see what we get out of the Commonwealth by opening up what the Commonwealth thinks of the Commonwealth.
Okay. So that's I can see that be a good way of generating a debate which must happen every generation or more, even often, about the future of it and how the leadership should work.
Yeah, I think we want people to come and endow research position, professorships, and like that, so that they can show that.
We're losing your audio, I'm afraid, Lord Desai. Okay, well, so we'll try again. I don't know why it's disappearing, but I guess one of the comments that people are making is that they're wondering why you refer to Her Majesty as Empress, because she's never been Empress of anywhere except India, which ended. This is a comment from Andrea Polden. She's making the point that that term of Empress was only ever used in India, which obviously, as you've said, ended when India became independent.
But in 1858, she was not. But she, being the Queen of England, was the head of India. But then she became formally the Empress because of what Disraeli did. But yeah, you're quite right. She's not the Empress of India at that time. But she did issue a very, very fundamental declaration of rights of her people, her subjects.
Yeah, I think too that there's the same comment from Andrea Polden saying that really her understanding of, and you might have a view on this or not, I guess, her understanding was that it wasn't Her Majesty telling the Commonwealth members that the Prince of Wales should become head, but only that she would like him to be head, and that the members accepted that proposition. Is that, as others recall, that change of or potential change of leadership? Was that the way it happened? The way anyone else has heard it? I mean, who may have been there or studied it? So it wasn't an instruction, it was a suggestion, and people wanted to accept it. Does that sound right?
Any more questions coming up?
There's one from a Peter Williams. If the Commonwealth disintegrated, would India really mind? What does it have to lose? I guess that's a little bit of a provocation to you, which you may wish to rise to, Lord Desai. Does it really, what's the skin in the game for India?
I think it would be a good education for the British press, if not the British royal family, to understand that there is no problem of any Commonwealth country becoming a republic at all. Australia is not a problem. Let them all do what they like, but they will be in the Commonwealth, because Commonwealth is no longer the old Commonwealth. I think that has to be understood by the people. And I think they're still not quite understood, because they're saying, oh, Australians may go this way. None of this matters.
No,
they're all part of the Commonwealth.
Okay, so, and India benefits from its affiliation sufficiently, even in its current state, I guess, is your view. Is that's, I guess.
Well, as long as they play cricket and use the English language, we're happy.
Right. Okay, then we have a question from Kevin Ryan, who's a graduate of the University of London, asking what opportunities exist for the Commonwealth to expand and renew. For example, the royal family has in recent years put a lot of work into strengthening the relationship and close bond with the Republic of Ireland, exemplified by the Queen's visit in 2011. And would the Commonwealth welcome back Ireland if one day the Republic decided to rejoin?
Would Ireland want to join?
I guess that's the question, although I think Sue Onslow has also put in the chat the reference to the 2007 Patterson Committee.
I think Ireland is a very interesting case of a country we did not join, because it never regarded itself as a colony, as it were. are not a conquered colony. It's all sorts of reservations. I've read about the Treaty of 1921, and it was a very peculiar thing. But the Irish decided they were not going to be a part of the Commonwealth. Because they, just as Sinn Féin MPs don't sit in the House of Commons because they don't want to take the oath to Her Majesty.
Unfortunately, there appears to be a problem with his audio with his microphone, Professor Thomson.
Yes, I think so. Perhaps we're going to sort of invite you to also make comments as we go through, and while that perhaps his audio comes back. But I mean, having read the Patterson Committee's report on criteria, I guess it would guide people's decisions on which countries could become either rejoin or become members, and presumably, if Ireland satisfied those, they would be welcomed.
But the key question is, would Ireland wish to join? As you say, that it would be welcome back, would it, if it did so, but it's whether the Dublin government wished to join. I was very struck by Lord Desai's arguments about the emotional links and the idea of the Commonwealth, which, let's face it, has diminished as the profile of the Commonwealth, its demography has shifted with the expansion, and the fact that 2/3 of the Commonwealth are now under the age of 30, which don't have the same emotional, it doesn't have the same emotional resonance, I think, as it did when Lord Desai was young. I was very taken with his arguments about the rotation of the Secretary Generalship, that it should only be one term and the major powers should not put forward candidates. But in the meantime, while there is a discussion also about the ceremonial headship, that they should keep the monarch until they have settled what would be the replacement. So because there are very pertinent issues around finance, around the politics of it, which would need to be addressed and settled. This was the argument of the Reverend Guy Hewitt at the event, Is the Commonwealth Working? That he, as a passionate Republican, could see the continued value of having the monarch as leader until this issue was settled. The other issue, of course, in leadership of the Commonwealth in terms of its future is this whole role of the chair in office, which with President Paul Kagame will be the chair in office for the next 2 years after the Kigali summit, and it is a controversial position. The Eminent Persons Group in 2011 advised that the post should be abolished. So I think that this is a very live issue in terms of continued reform of the Commonwealth and its leadership's role with an S. Thank you, sir, for pointing out about this question about membership. There is indeed a queue to join the Commonwealth, with countries coming from the Francophonie who have not had the historic and colonial links with the former British control. Zimbabwe is very keen to rejoin. The Maldives has rejoined. Togo is keen to join. There is a list, and this can baffle some critics of the Commonwealth that it is seen as an attractive organisation to join, precisely as you point out, because it doesn't have P5 members, and it's an Anglophone community, not simply of governments, but also of professional associations, organisations and peoples, so that it's multi-layered and multi-dimensional. I wholeheartedly endorse your argument for more scholarships, more research attachments, and that academics should come and spend time here studying Commonwealth studies, working on policy analysis and policy relevant issues. I think that would be tremendous, and thank you for your support for this idea. And I'm also keen that the Institute of Commonwealth Studies should take part in the Commonwealth Split Scholarships scheme, which I think is a very valuable scheme, which is run by the Association, of course, of Universities. So I wholeheartedly support that.
Having trouble with the audio still.
I think so, Professor Thomson. I'm afraid that to stop Lord Desai continuing to battle and losing that battle, perhaps this discussion should be brought to an end.
Yes, I think so. There's a number of questions or comments. That I'll just sort of summarize, and I think the ones we would support in this discussion, which is about, the need really for more education, really for the younger generation, here in this country and elsewhere. If we want the Commonwealth to thrive and be supported, it needs to be understood, and perhaps it's not that well understood at the moment. And there's a number of suggestions made by some participants about the importance of doing that education and getting on with it. So I think we would broadly support that. a number of specific suggestions, which we probably won't have time to adjust now, but the ideas of a bank, idea of becoming a treaty-based organization is all good fuel for future discussions, and perhaps the work of the Institute itself as it moves forward in its new, more sort of policy-oriented role in thinking about the future of the new Commonwealth. So I think that brings us, I think, to the time in the end. And
thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, your voice has returned, which at least has given us a chance to thank you, Lord Desai, for provoking this discussion.
We must launch an appeal to all Commonwealth countries. Maybe you should go to Kigali and tell them on our behalf that we want to invite their scholars with their help to come to London and study the Commonwealth, and that will enrich the Commonwealth Institute.
Yeah, I think that's right, and each other, about how the future could be developed. Exactly. Thank you so much, and thank you, Professor Onslow, for your guiding us through this conversation. And we look forward to the next stages of the work that I know the Institute has undergoing and is planned very soon. So thank you, everyone.